Yo, what's up YouTube? Goodergram back here with another one, and at long last in this video I'll be sharing with you guys the tanky, high sustainability speed rogue that I personally crafted and used for tier 100 nightmares and in-game content pushing in general. Let it be noted that I've used a variation of this same build since beta, and more specifically when it comes to what I'm calling the Terminator variant of my build, which is what I'll be showcasing to you guys today. I've been running that since the beginning of this season, and with the balancing changes brought with it, the challenge of running these higher nightmare tiers isn't as hard as preseason. Meaning there are a variety of viable builds which you can use in order to secure yourself a tier 100, that is as long as you hit certain thresholds and keep a few constants that hold necessary for everyone, which I'll be covering in this video. Before we dive right into the specifics, I want you guys to know that even though this build is spec specifically for pushing these tier 100 nightmare dungeons, it can still hold its own against the likes of Uber Lilith and can beyond be considered a speed clearing build for any lower content, as I can clear these tier 100s in 5 minutes or less, as you'll see with the showcase on screen now. As you guys should know, the hardest part about tier 100s is meeting the sustainability requirements needed in order to even survive. That's why going into Season 1, I decided to follow the mindset of honing my poison damage to the furthest extent possible, but also added a secondary goal of becoming as tanky as possible in order to ensure that my build would be adequately geared and powered for whatever content it was put up against, whilst keeping that pace going into tier 100 most importantly. There's some refining and optimization to be done in regards to my gear and stat rolls specifically. However, as you can see, we are more than comfortable when it comes to not only survivability, but especially damage within tier 100s. At this stage, I feel as if though the progression I've accomplished in regards to my build is more than adequate to showcase to you guys and give you an accurate representation of what a tier 100 build would even look like post-patch, and specifically how I went about getting to that point. I already mentioned this in my previous video, which was a prelude to this build guide. However, I wanted to reiterate it because some of you might not have seen that and might be wondering why your builds aren't performing or feeling the same as they did about a week ago, and that would be because with the recent patch 1.1.1 came a hotfix to bursting venoms, which incidentally resulted in a nerf to the aspect and poison rogues as a whole. Since then, I've spent a lot of time and gold making the necessary changes in order to not only get my build back online, but to get it performing even better than previously. I've managed to achieve my goal of creating what I believe to be the best and most versatile rogue for not only leveling, mid to late game content, and speed clearing, but also tier 100s. And so with that, I feel more than happy with where I've landed in regards to both the offensive and defensive sides of my build. In fact, at this point, I guess we beat the game. The poison damage at any given moment I'm dealing is just overpowering to even these tier 100 mobs. Combine this with the insane effects of the Apothecary Heart or even Creeping Death and Barber, you have what is one of the most broken builds I've seen yet. And I don't even have God Rolled gear yet. Nor do I pick up any sort of offensive stats on my amulet, which if I chose to do so, would just significantly boost my damage overall. As you can see though, even with the barrage of attacks coming from these Thorn Beasts, Cold Enchanted Elites, and other mobs that don't play into the rogue's strengths, survivability isn't an issue at all. I rarely ever get to the point where I even think I might die, but when I do, I gotta say it does present a nice scare and an adrenaline rush. Then my damage reduction while injured kicks in and saves me, which I can rejoice with a good laugh. What I've put together here though will obliterate tier 100s of your choosing and can be used at any stage of your progression no matter what the content you're looking to complete is. Like I said, it can be used and is very viable for not only leveling, but mid to late game content, tier 100s included. At the end of the day, this is just what I personally find fits my preferences for playstyle and still functions extremely well. That being said, I crafted the entire build from Paragon to every stat roll to be versatile enough to rearrange or be subbed out for anything necessary, so feel free to change things up and determine what to use at your own discretion. I will be going over a couple options, however since I have so much time and tester gear at this point, the plan is to roll out a series of guides that will address each variation of my current Terminator tier 100 build. With that out of the way though, without further ado, let's dive right into the skills. Starting us off strong here though with our bread and our butter, our basic and our core. We're going to be picking up Puncture because it's going to give us good energy regeneration. Every third cast it's going to proc slow, which is a good CC effect and will give us survivability in turn. And also, it's going to give us infinite vulnerability proc, and vulnerability is the most important multiplicative factor in the game. Every class wants vulnerability, and as rogues, we get that vulnerability from fundamental puncture. And also, due to the aspect pestilent points, every third cast on top of that slow proc will also proc poison imbuement. Moving on to our core though, we're of course going to be picking up Twisting Blades, speccing out into Improved Twisting Blades for that Daze effect. We want that Daze from Improved Twisting Blades over that Reduced Cooldown from Advanced, because that Daze is a CC effect and will essentially grant us more survivability within these tier 100s. Right below that, speaking of survivability, we can see that we still pick up 3 out of 3 ranks of Sturdy, as well as Siphoning Strikes. Siphoning Strikes did get nerfed to a 75% chance to heal, however it has since been buffed to 85% chance, making it a lot more viable. I do also run Stolen Vigor in tandem with this, so it just makes our sustainability pretty overpowered. Sturdy giving us 12% close damage reduction. This is good as we do spam reduction on our amulet, chest piece, and pants. However, having this extra 12% close damage reduction is pretty massive. Moving on down here to our agility skills though, we can see that we do still pick up Shadow Step as well as Dash. Now Shadow Step is very important as it's one of our only ways to actually break CCs, and let me tell you, in tier 100 nightmare dungeons and just the game in general as a rogue, there's just nothing more annoying or hindering than a CC effect. And that could be said for any class. So you absolutely need some form of Unstoppable, which will grant you that CC break. The only ways to gain Unstoppable would be Shadow Step, Concealment, or Shadow Clone. And so if you're not running one of those, the CC effects in the game definitely will get you and might even cause your death. As you can see, we don't actually spec out into the improved forms of Shadow Step nor Dash anymore, and that's simply due to the fact that those upgrades aren't actually all that beneficial nor necessary, so I just despec those points and utilize them in a few other places. We do still pick up Dash as it's still the best movement skill in the game and helps us with our clear speed. On top of that, it's very good for just applying poison as we can dash back and forth, having our Twisting Blades follow behind us, essentially wiping out entire packs of mobs that would otherwise take us probably multiple minutes. However, I will say with all the movement speed upgrades, on top of the fact that we have near infinite evades now, Dash isn't all that necessary. If you wanted to despec it and go ahead and pick up maybe Concealment or Poison Trap, Death Trap, Shadow Clone maybe even, you probably could. However, it's a playstyle preference for me to have it, so that's why I pick it up. As we can see though, one crucial change giving us a massive CC benefit is going to be on the right of Dash here, we pick up Concussive and Trick Attacks again. Now the way that Trick Attacks works is whenever we critically strike a dazed enemy, we're going to knock them down. And knocking down enemies is very overpowered. Since we have Daze on our Twisting Blades, we can infinitely daze and then critically strike enemies, locking them into a repetitive cycle of just standing up and then getting knocked back down again. This is very good for tier 100s as it will allow you to basically just go in and infinitely CC any mob that you go up against, which adds an extra layer of survivability as they won't be able to attack. Moving on above that, we can see that we pick up Concussive, as whenever we will have those enemies knocked down, we'll gain a little bit of extra critical strike chance against them, which is pretty big because we need any critical strike chance for our Bursting Venoms aspect. Looking at our subverting skills here though, we can see that we still do pick up Dark Shroud, however we're not picking up subverting Dark Shroud anymore. We just don't need that movement speed, and that chance to not lose the Dark Shrouds, 14%, is not all that good in my opinion. And that would simply be due to the fact that we run the Umbrous aspect and have a near 100% uptime on Dark Shroud anyways, so not losing one at a 15% chance is pretty negligible. However, moving on down below that, we do still pick up Exploit and Malice especially, as that's extra damage outright, and that vulnerable damage increase for Malice is very important. Moving on to Precision Imbuement, this is going to give us increased critical strike chance with imbued skills. This is very good. We need any critical strike chance and lucky hit chance we can get for our Bursting Venoms aspect, especially after the nerf. Of course, when it comes to our imbuement skills, we're going to be picking up Poison Imbuement. and then we're going to be specking out into blended poison imbuement because this is going to give us 75% increased poison when we critically strike with poison imbued skills. Right below that, we're of course going to be picking up debilitating toxins, as this is going to give us 12% damage reduction from poison enemies, and then to the left of that we pick up deadly venom, as this is going to give us increased poison damage. Below that we do pick up 1 point of alchemical advantage for that extra attack speed. And then when it comes to our ultimate skills, we don't pick up any ultimate skills, however we take full advantage of the passives available to us here. We're going to start up here with Innervation. This is going to give us actually just extra energy maintenance. And then Alchemist Fortune, this is going to give us extra lucky hit chance. And this is very important once again for that Bursting Venoms aspect, considering it got nerfed. Moving on to the left of that, on the same note, we're going to pick up Second Wind. This is going to give us another 15% increased lucky hit chance for 5 seconds every time we spend 100 energy, and we're spending energy constantly, so this is pretty much always going to be procced. Moving on down below that though, you can see we do pick up 1 point of Adrenaline Rush. We'd previously been picking up 3 out of 3, however with 3 out of 3 of Innervation right up here, we don't really need the 3 out of 3 ranks of Adrenaline Rush, so we pick up 3 out of 3 ranks of Haste. And 3 out of 3 ranks of Haste is going to give us that increased movement speed and attack speed. Looking at our key passive here, we of course still pick up Momentum, as it's going to give us that damage reduction, energy regeneration, and movement speed. With all that being covered, I think that's going to wrap it up for our skills here. So let's go ahead and move on and take a look at our gear. Diving right into our gear here, we're not going to be spending as much time on our stats as we will our aspects, as we're going to be throwing up a stat sheet on screen exactly how we did in our previous build guides that you can reference in regards to what stats to roll on your gear and which ones to prioritize. Like I said, we're mainly going to be focusing on the aspects here, reason being they're the main reason for our attack and survivability gain. However, there is a large portion of that that can be attributed to the Paragon board respec, which we'll be covering later. But with that being said, diving right into our first aspect here, we're going to have the accelerating aspect on our crossbow. Now we had previously been running the corruption aspect on our crossbow and the accelerating aspect on our ring. However, we've since swapped those due to the fact that Bursting Venoms did get that proc rate nerf, so we need extra proc rate and in turn attack speed, so that's why having the accelerating aspect on your bow, in my opinion, is biz at this point in time. Not only will this help with the proc rates of our Bursting Venom aspect, but due to the fact that Siphoning Strikes got that little buff to the lucky hit chance, we're going to be able to sustain ourselves a lot better, as we're going to have more lucky hit procs in general. Real quick, you'll notice that I traded off that damage to close enemies on my bow to what is now all stats, and that's simply due to the fact that we needed to reach certain thresholds in order to unlock the doubling of the effects on our rare nodes within the Paragon board. Looking at our boots here, nothing has changed. We're still running the aspect of Shared Misery, and it will spread our CC effects, which is very powerful considering we are running what is a primarily CC build. So all of our different CC effects that we have built in will be applied to pretty much every enemy that we go up against. And again, in turn, due to the fact that we have that accelerating aspect on our crossbow, we're going to be able to proc this more often, as it is a lucky hit proc. If you were to in turn pair these CCs in Shared Misery with something like the Creeping Death Malignant Heart, then you would see massive amounts of poison damage gains. In fact, I've tested it, and you gain on average about 3 million poison damage just for the CC effects that you have applied to an enemy. The only thing that's changed here in regards to the stats would be the main stat. We no longer take 3 max evade charges, we take reduced cooldown on our evade, which is how we get that infinite evades like I mentioned. Nothing has changed here in regards to our pants. We're still running the same sort of stat rolls, and we're still rocking with the aspect of might. In my opinion, the aspect of might is even more overpowered than ever, as we now have so much attack speed that we definitely 100% have full uptime on that 20% damage reduction from basic skills. When glancing at our gloves, you'll notice that nothing has really changed apart from the fact that we are running bursting venoms on our gloves now, although the arrangement in which you order these aspects really doesn't matter apart from your amulet and crossbow, as they apply multipliers to the effects of the aspects that you put on them. With that being said, despite the nerf to bursting venom's proc rate, we still absolutely want to run it, as it's the entire focal point and center of our build. Without bursting venoms, we wouldn't be doing any poison damage and we wouldn't be the poison rogue. So we definitely want to spam lucky hit chance, critical strike chance, and run this bursting venoms aspect. Moving on to our chest here, you'll notice that following suit of the pants, just like I said, we're going to be picking up all damage reduction stats and total armor. The stat rolls on this specific piece of gear aren't that good, however we make do with what we have. In regards to the disobedience aspect, I know we were running that on the amulet prior, however with our rework to Paragon, which we'll dive into here in just a second, we got quite a bit of armor, so we don't really fully need that disobedience aspect on the amulet. In my opinion, you can still run it. However, if you wanted to run something like Stolen Vigor, that's just as viable as an option. Jumping up and looking at our helm, you guys will notice that for the same reason why we traded out the accelerating aspect onto our bow, we traded cooldown reduction for basic skill attack speed to help with all lucky hit and critical strike chance procs, but also in turn, we gave ourselves an increased uptime on the Umbrus aspect, which is what we're running on the helm, as it is a lucky and critical strike proc. However, mainly it's a marksman skill proc, which is our basic skill puncture, so it benefits from that basic skill attack speed as well. Dropping down to take a look at our daggers here, we of course run Ashira's Conjar, which gives us that increased lucky hit chance and attack speed, which is good for our procs all around. Ever since the patch to bursting venoms, we needed as much lucky hit and attack speed as possible. Therefore, in my opinion, Ashira's Conjar is biz, and there's no real reason to run anything else. Therefore, we'll probably be running it into the foreseeable future. Moving over and taking a look at our legendary dagger though, I want to start off by first mentioning, well, we are now running daggers permanently, as poison doesn't scale off of critical strike damage, so there's no real point to run swords, and also we no longer run that damage to close enemy stat, as we have it as a main stat, so we pick up once again all stats in order to aid our thresholds for Paragon node doubling. On top of that, we do go ahead and just run the Twisting Blades aspect, as we do need to pick that up somewhere. Moving on and getting us started off here with our first ring, we of course have the aspect of corruption. Just like I said, we swapped out this for the accelerating aspect on our bow. In fact, this gave us quite a bit of damage on top of proc rates for not only lucky hit, but critical strike. So no real downside in the trade-off. As long as we still run corruption to get that increased imbuement potency, we have no issue. Jumping up and taking a look at our second ring here, you'll notice that we drop both of those max life stats for resource regen. We're able to do this with that slight Paragon board rework, as well as those all stats trade-offs, and it was actually necessary due to the fact that we can no longer run Inner Sight anymore, as it's physically busted and does not charge nor proc. This is actually very crucial and helps with energy maintenance in order to ensure that we have near 100% uptime on our damage output. But in regards to our aspect, just like we had mentioned previously, we're running Pestilent points for that extra bursting venoms proc off of the third cast of our puncture being poison imbued. And since we have all that extra attack speed bonus, we're actually reliably able to proc our bursting venoms poison pools with just our puncture, so that helps a lot with our uptime on, well, bursting venoms, but also poison damage, considering we did just get that nerf to proc rates on bursting venoms. Last but not least, rounding off our gear here, with our amulet, we're of course going to be picking up those damage reduction stats alongside total armor for that survivability, and then when it comes to our aspect, we're going to be running Stolen Vigor for that sustainability and life regen. Now, like I said before, it's possible and just as viable to go ahead and run Disobedience on this amulet and not have any problems. Just go ahead and put Stolen Vigor on your helm, chest, or pants, and it'll have the same effect essentially. I feel as if those Stolen Vigor is probably going to be biz on your amulet for the foreseeable future, due to the fact that we already have so much total armor, and with the nerf to Disobedience this season, the benefit that it gives just isn't that much compared to what Stolen Vigor can do for you. Stolen Vigor will give you anywhere from 12 to 1500 life regeneration every second, which is absolutely ungodly, especially when paired with not only siphoning strikes, but all of the damage reduction that we have. There's literally nothing in the game that can kill you or one-shot you, so there's absolutely no reason to trade off Disobedience or put anything else on. I will say we did go a bit overboard on the defensive side of things, however, that was the whole point. We wanted to make a tanky rogue that could do tier 100, speed run them, and never die. We also wanted a build that could be used at any point in your progression that would allow you to do content higher than you, basically up to whatever level you wanted. And yet there are still optimizations and refinements to be made that would allow you to not only pick up offense, but more defense if you chose to do so. I will be looking into and testing that out. However, as of right now, I feel very comfortable with where my build's at, like I said, so that's why I wanted to go ahead and put it out here in front of you guys and let you go exactly what you need in order to copy it for yourselves. Moving on here though, in regards to gems and hearts, we're going to want to be picking up amethysts on our weapons for that damage over time, rubies on our gear for that max life. When it comes to our malignant hearts, we definitely have a lot of options. However, I'm a little bit limited based on my sockets right now, so I pick up the calculated devious heart, which allows me to proc stun and then spread it through shared misery every 150 primary resource that we spend. And as you guys know, since we spend a lot of resource and are constantly spamming, that's pretty much going to be a constant proc that we can spread throughout our enemies. And as I've already stated, any CC effect that you can get is going to essentially just be extra survivability, so this is going to be very good, especially if paired with something like the Wrathful Creeping Death Heart, as each CC effect that you have applied to an enemy at any given moment will give you anywhere from a 40 to 50% boost on your damage over time effects. That's pretty broken. I had previously been running the resource regen heart, however the effects aren't that beneficial and I'm not even sure if it actually works properly, so I swapped off to this one and found that the stun proc actually spreads quite well, so it's a worthwhile investment. Now moving down to our first ring here, you'll see that we have the Vile Apothecary Wrathful Heart. In my opinion, this is probably the best one because it's just so good for clear speed and overall damage. Furthermore, the fact that we are applying all imbuement effects gives us an extra chance to proc our poison pool, so that makes this heart even better. The other two just don't really compare unless you spec out specifically to cater to them. Even then, they just don't really feel comparable, and let me explain what I mean. I've been running a lot of Creeping Death recently, and the effects of Creeping Death are super overpowered. Like I said, it can give you anywhere from 40 to 50% increased poison damage based on how many CC effects you have applied to an enemy at any given time. Meaning I can get anywhere from 40 to 120 plus percent multipliers on my poison damage. That ends up giving me anywhere from 2 to 3 million poison damage. However, since we got that nerf to bursting venoms, it's hard to actually keep our uptime on poison damage to a near 100% rate, despite all the changes and optimizations we've made in order to try to raise our proc rates. Therefore, the effects of Creeping Death are conditional. We don't always have poison damage, and we don't always apply all of those CCs that we need in order to get maximum efficiency. And on top of that, Creeping Death is even more conditional, as the effects only apply to basic mobs, unstoppable mobs, elites, and staggered bosses. Meaning going into boss fights, unless you can stagger that boss, you won't be able to get the multiplicative factors from that heart. So when you factor in the downtime and loss of efficiency that come with Creeping Death, in my opinion, Vile Apothecary is just so much better. That is at least for speed clearing and tier 100 nightmare dungeons. When it comes to specifically Uber Lilith, you're probably going to want to run Creeping Death, and let me explain why. you actually can stun Uber Lilith, and it's a strategy to do so. Meaning you'll be able to take full advantage of the Creeping Death's effects. You'll have 150% multiplier on your damage over time effects whenever you're able to stun Uber Lilith. That'll equate to about 40 million poison damage if you're interested. Despite Barber being patched to work with Rogue, I still don't find it to be an adequate replacement for the Vile Apothecary Heart, as it kind of takes away from the entire point and concept of the poison build, and it negates all effects of the Bursting Venoms aspect. Therefore, you're going to have to heavily rely on Barber and kind of redesign your spec to even be able to come online again. I just have no interest in ruining what is a near perfect iteration of my tier 100 variant. However, that's not to be said that it can't be done. Dropping down and rounding off our Malignant Hearts here, we have the Revenge Brutal Heart, and this is a no-brainer as it gives us 20% damage reduction, and as we all know, they nerfed damage reduction this season, and if we're trying to run tier 100s, we need as much survivability as possible, so this definitely helps with that. And so that's going to go ahead and do it for our skills, stats, aspects, gems, and hearts. Jumping up and taking a look at our specialization, as I mentioned before, we're going to be running combo points this time because, well, they broke Inner Sight. It no longer charges, it doesn't proc, it doesn't do anything, it just sits there. So, combo points is best in slot for now because not only does it give us up to 150% damage multiplier, it'll also give us 60% movement speed on top of that. In regards to our Paragon board, we're going to be keeping the foundations. We'll swap 2 glyphs and compensate for the surrounding nodes. However, apart from that, there won't be any major changes, meaning you won't have to worry about any massive gold costs, nor going out of your way to level any of those glyphs. Looking at our first board here, we're going to be changing out the closer glyph for versatility, which is going to give us 22.5 damage, 225 armor. On top of that, non-basic and non-core skills deal 15% increased damage, so that means our poison imbuement skill will get a multiplicative factor of 15%. Now moving on up here to our Cunning Stratagem board, we're going to be picking up the Efficacy glyph instead of Bane. Now this is going to give us 35% core skill damage, 250 armor, and 25 dex. On top of that, imbuement skill effects have 20% increased potency. Once again, very good for the Poison Rogue, and then moving on to the right of that, we still pick up the Eldritch Bounty legendary node, as well as the rare node imbuer and the magic node surrounding. However, we are going to go ahead and change out the tracker glyph for the closer glyph and just respect the surrounding area a little bit in order to pick up that dex to get the maximum efficiency on that glyph. Apart from that, the only other thing that's changed within our Paragon board is going to be on our 4th board here, which is Exploited Weakness. We're no longer going to be picking up combat. As I said, we traded off combat and tracker for efficacy and versatility. So in doing so, we just went ahead and slid down Bane to this slot right here because Bane's very crucial. It gives us 77.2 poison damage, also a 10% chance for our poisoning effects to deal double the amount of damage over time. So just an absolutely crucial glyph here. We don't want to miss out on that. Apart from that, we just respect for some strength to make sure that we're gaining the maximum efficiency. And with that being said, you guys can go ahead and copy the rest of the board, or you should already have the rest of the board copied as it's exactly the same. So looking at it, we just go over and pick up the turf glyph here, and then just above that, the exploit glyph here, and all the nodes surrounding in order to give those their maximum efficiency. And now that we've gone ahead and went over all of that, I believe that's going to wrap it up for our build. We went over our skills, stats, aspects, gems and hearts, specialization, and now our Paragon board. So there's not much else left to be said. I'll be throwing up my stat sheet on screen right now so you guys can see my individual percentages. But as always, if you guys are interested in keeping updated with my build, strategies, or other D4 content in general, don't forget to subscribe. If you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up and drop any questions or feedback you might have down in the comments section. Thanks for watching, guys, and peace out.